Hello, welcome to lesson 4. You can see I've got my gloves on here. We're at Murder at Old Fields. We're doing fingerprint analysis today, so this is a pretty cool lesson. There's some things that we can do in the classroom that are kind of fun, and there's some stuff that we can do just online that'll make it a little bit easier to understand. So let's just take a quick preview here. You're going to watch this video and then you're going to read the lesson. I would warn you, read the lesson carefully because this is a more complicated one. There's a lot of variation in fingerprints that you're going to have to understand. Then you'll take the quiz online and submit that. Then you will do the lab. I would suggest doing the paper version of the lab activity first in your booklet, being very comfortable and confident, and then later on we can go through and do the online version of the lab, because once you submit that, it's done. And this is a more complicated lesson than other ones because there's a lot of patterns and some of them are very tricky to distinguish, so you're going to take your time reading this. One thing I will say is that I will try and illustrate a bit some of the major things to look for when you're looking at fingerprints, but you're going to have to do a lot of this on your own, so take your time. After that, you will make a prediction. Make that at the start of lesson 5, just right at the top of the page. You will have to do the mapping, and what that means is that you are going to have to go to your map of the crime scene, like you have for the last few lessons, for your hair and your blood, and now you're going to have to put fingerprints and label everybody's fingerprints where you found them. At this point in the case, after you're done fingerprints, you should have a very high degree of certainty who the killer is. The blood was inconclusive because there was 2 people with the same blood type. The hair is a little bit murky, but there's a few things in here that aren't adding up. And now with the fingerprint analysis, there's some things that aren't adding up with the fingerprints that we have found in the crime scene. So you should be able to make a great prediction at the start before we begin lesson 5. So you'll write that in your book. And after you do the map and the prediction, down here, you will plan ahead. Now what does that mean? Planning ahead means you have a final project coming up in the topic of forensics. We'll talk about it at the end of this lesson, but what I'm saying is you need to think of an area of study within forensics that you want to do your own presentation on, your own research project where you'll find research and sources, compile it, and share it with everyone. So start thinking. We can talk about it in a little bit, but get that gears turning in your head about, I want to do a project on this, or maybe I want to do a project on that. What is my forensic project going to be? You should have a good start, a good time to start thinking about that. Let's look down here. So now we are going to, and the reason I have gloves on is because this fingerprint powder here, I can't even touch it without getting everything dirty, but once you touch it, it goes everywhere, and it makes marks, and it's impossible to remove. So I've put paper down here because I'm going to just take the paper and throw it out. All of my equipment is covered in plastic wrap right now. It's like I'm actually like trying to get away with a murder because I want to be able to just take everything off of my desk and throw it in the garbage with all the powder and dust everywhere because it's just such a messy lab. This is why I don't like doing this lab in the classroom in the real world, because it leaves dust all over the room that will track for days and weeks all over the school. It stains clothing, it stains arms, it stains hands. It's a messy one. So we'll do the online one, and we might play around a little bit with the in-person ones, but not too much because it is a disaster once you start dusting everywhere. This dust is, it's like permanent marker but in dust form. Ugh. All right. So I'm going to give you a basic overview of fingerprints, but you are going to have to do some of this on your own, just so you know. So we're looking here. You can look at this, or if you're on the laptop, you can look right. You would go to fingerprint analysis lesson. There you go. Same kind of thing. That's what we're looking at here. So you can look at that. And then later on, you're going to do the lab, which is right here, where you will select fingerprint lab, and you will only submit that much later on after you're comfortable and done that on paper first. So let's go. So fingerprint analysis. Let's just look down here. All right. Any original fingerprints have been destroyed, obviously, but we found some at the crime scene for you. A fingerprint is an individual characteristic. No people have been found to share the exact same fingerprint. A fingerprint will remain unchanged for the life of an individual. Excellent. Fingerprints have general characteristic patterns that allow them to be systematically identified. There are 3 types of fingerprints based on their general visual pattern. They are arches, loops, and whorls. So you're going to have arches, loops, and whorls, and subdivisions of those that you will study. This is the core of the lesson. Arches are about 5% of fingerprints, loops are about 60 to 70% of all fingerprint types, and whorls are about 25% of all fingerprint types. Each group is further subdivided based on smaller differences, and we're going to get into those smaller differences. Let's look ahead. Like I said, I'm going through this quickly because you will have to take some time and read this. So within arches, there is 2 types, plain arch and tented arch. Within loop, there is radial and ulnar, and within whorl, there is plain, central pocket, double, or accidental. We'll get into that right away. First of all, when I start my crime syndicate, I want you to read this. Did you know koalas, primates, and humans are the only animals with unique prints? Koala prints cannot be distinguished from human prints. Note to self, hire a criminal koala. All right, now here we are. These little areas here, this is not like this right here, arch, loop, and whorl is what you're really studying. But within all these patterns, these are what we call the minutia. Minutia is another word for like specific little details, right? You can read right here. The individuality of any fingerprint is not based on the general shape, but instead on its ridge and specific characteristics, the minutia. The recognition of these ridges and their relative number and approximate location are observed on the observed print are special characteristics that make each fingerprint unique. Below are some of the specific characteristics. Now you can see a bifurcation. If you look on the laptop here, it's actually a little bit more clear. You can see there, just take a look, right? So it tells you what a bifurcation is, an enclosure, a ridge ending, a short ridge, a delta, it's like a triangle almost, and a ridge dot. Let's look down here. So a bifurcation is like a fork. It's when a ridge splits into 2. Okay? An enclosure is when a ridge splits into 2 but then closes back up. Like that. Right? A short ridge is just a piece. If you got like your normal fingerprint and then you got a little piece like that sticking in, that's a short ridge. A ridge ending is, say you have all these patterns and all of a sudden that one just ends. That's a ridge ending. A delta is kind of like meeting up in a triangular fashion. And a ridge dot is like a hard piece of ridge kind of floating freely like that. Generally speaking, take your time and look at these. This is a complicated lesson. All right, now I'll flip down here. So let's get into our first pattern, arches. No problem. This is a pretty easy one. There's a plain arch which looks more like, and I'm summarizing here, a hill in the prints. Then there is what we call a tented arch, which is much more like there's like a strong piece inside of it. So let's read about that now. And you've got to look at this and take your time. A plain arch is the simplest type of fingerprint formed by ridges entering one side of the print and exiting the opposite. They enter one side, they exit the opposite, and they have a slight bump in them, right? Tented arches are very similar to plain arches, but they have a characteristic spike in the center. There's the spike. Arches do not have deltas. Deltas are these things that are coming up in loops. Deltas are like triangular kind of areas within a print. So now let's look at loops. So that's arches. There's 2 types. There's 2 types of loops. There is a radial loop and an ulnar loop. Radial means, let's read. Here we go. Loops have 1 delta, so there's a delta in this loop. There's a delta in that loop. So they both have deltas, but one is going to one direction and one is going to the other direction. Now if this is a hand, the fingers would be here and the thumb would be here. Let's pretend like that. So if this loop leads towards a thumb versus if this loop leads towards the other fingers on the hand is what's going to give it a different name. So let's look. Loops must have 1 delta and 1 or more wedges entering from one side of the print, recurving and exiting the same side. So it's almost like an arch, but it kind of goes up the arch and then curls back. So if you're looking at, oh, let's just use this for an example. Here, I'll use the back of the paper. A loop goes like this. You kind of have that tented arch kind of vibe with your delta underneath, right, where your fingerprints. But instead of going over, it actually goes up, oh, and it curves back, right? And then this side continues to go over. And that's what makes a loop. That's the general vibe of a loop. Now, which way this flows to tells you if it's radial or ulnar. So let's look at that. If the loop opens towards the thumb, oh, I made this mistake there. It's called a radial loop. If a loop opens towards the little finger, it's called ulnar. Oh, there we go. Yep. Ulnar, going to the fingers. Radial, opening towards the thumb if your hand was like this. And that's how the fingerprint was taken. Cool. Now, the most complicated one you're going to have to read a little bit more on your own is a whorl. Whorls are like circles, kind of like little racetracks with inside it. So, a whorl can be identified. Now, I can't go into all the detail on this one, so take your time and look over this page on whorls. A whorl can be identified by the presence of at least one ridge that makes or tends to make a complete circuit and the presence of two deltas. A delta, a delta, a delta, a delta, and a complete loop. They both have them, but let's look. A plane whorl can be differentiated from a central pocket whorl by drawing a straight line between the deltas. If the line comes in contact with any of the recurving edges around the core, it's a plane whorl. If no spiral ridge surrounding the core is touched, it's a central pocket whorl. There's also double loop whorls and accidental whorls. You'll have to go into that on your own because I'd like to move on to tell you what you need to do. So this next part here, the next few pages in the book, once you get the general vibe of the fingerprints, the next few pages here are what we would do in class if we were doing each other's fingerprints and taking our own fingerprints and doing dusting and lifting for fingerprints. And now I'm going to give you a little taste of that right away. I'll show you how to dust for fingerprints. I'll show you how to do your own fingerprints. But we're not going to do that necessarily unless we have some extra time and we can make sure we can clean it up properly. Because like I said, it is a disaster once you get this dust out. So we don't have to worry about that. What you do have to worry about, though, is down here. You're going to have to go through the teacup, the hammer, the money chest, the door, the window, and they're all provided in the book on the next pages, right? Also, if you look on the online lab, you have to do the control group by yourself. You have to go through every print and identify the control group. You could cheat a little bit because in the booklet, they actually tell you Alexander Smith, Henry Bauer, they give you all of their fingerprint types. So you can kind of use the booklet to help you do the online version. That's why I'm saying fill out everything in the booklet for this section first and then do the online later. So you go through here, it tells you Alexander Smith, Henry Bowers, Anton Geisler, Marianne Abbott, Rebecca Smith, Francis Curon. You have all their fingerprints and it actually does the work for you. It tells you what type. So that's pretty cool. But you have to go through these ones and say who they could have belonged to down here. So that's going to be a paper version of the lab. Do your best to try and find those. Once you do it on paper, once you've done it on paper and you think you know whose prints are, then you are allowed to go into the online version and start clicking away through all the boxes and stuff like that and identifying them and then submitting it. But do it later. Take a day off. Take a break when I come back, we look at it, then submit it once you're comfortable and confident because this is a very detail-oriented lab. Next up, I said too, after you did that lab, if you look here, you're supposed to make a prediction. So go to the start of lesson 5 and say prediction and write who you think it is. Also, you have to do it on the map. So what you have to do is you have to go back like we've done before. You have to go to your map of the crime scene. Now you're going to have all these fingerprints. You're going to have V, W, X, Y, Z, and those will be on the crime scene. Right here, V, W, X, Y, and Z within the crime scene, and you're going to have to label whose they are now that you've identified them. So you have to do that as well. And then if you're done, you can start planning ahead. And what I mean by that, I mean thinking about what you want your final project in forensics to be. After this lab, you should have a good idea who the criminal is, and you're going to use all the other labs and other assignments coming up to actually prove beyond a shadow of a doubt who did it. So you've got to start thinking about, what do I want my final project to be? Do I want it to be on a certain serial killer, a certain type of crime investigation technique, maybe comparing media versus reality, things like that. So you have to start thinking ahead about what your final project for this course is going to be for this unit that you're going to share and research with everybody. Now, I wanted to show you a couple things. I want to show you, first of all, how you would take a fingerprint. And this is something, like I said, that we might do. So I've got this here. Something we might do. So you would have print ink right here. You can see. You got some fingerprint ink, and you would put your finger in the print ink. Right? It's kind of a little bit shiny. It's a little shinier than you think it would be. Now, if you were doing this properly, there's a whole section in the booklet here that we studied in our booklet in the package about how you would put this finger onto the paper properly. It's called print rolling, and it's actually another person takes your hand and properly does that and rolls it a certain way to get a clean print. I'm going to try and simulate that as best I can. The person would grab your finger, they would place it down, and they would move it from edge to edge and do a roll, and you would have a nice, clean print. That's what you would do. Say you were being investigated for a crime. I'm just going to wipe that off because it leaves a terrible mess. Say you were being investigated for a crime. I'm going to put this back on because there's a bigger mess coming. They would take you into the police station, and they would do prints just like that. They do it for all your hands. You'd have a print sheet, thumb, first finger, second, third, just like we have in the booklet. For all the suspects and victims. Same kind of thing. So you would come in and you would do all your prints. That's taking a print. That is one of the lab activities that they suggest we do. So we might do that if we have some free time where we can all print each other. The second thing, let me just grab a disc here. Right. Perfect. The second thing is called dusting for prints. What does that mean? That means, say you were walking around a crime scene, you say, oh, that looks like somebody left a fingerprint on that object, or on that glass, or on that window, or there was this, it's normally surfaces that are hard that leave good prints, where you can really leave, you can't really leave a good fingerprint on paper. It's possible, but it's not as good as metal or glass. So prints are only good on certain things, and only if they're preserved. So say you see a fingerprint. What do? You just take your camera and go click, we got the fingerprint. You can't see anything. You have to do something called dusting for prints. And this dust is going to stick to the grease of your fingerprint. Because everybody's hands have grease on them. A little bit of oil at all times. Even if you wash your hands, within seconds, you will have oil back on your fingers. You touch a surface. The investigator puts dust on it, shakes it off. Now you have a nicely blackened, outlined fingerprint. You can take a picture of that, or you can do something called print capturing, and I'm going to show you how to do that right away too. So let's just look down here. First of all, if you want a good area to get some grease, generally like by your nose or your chin, you can touch that, and that's like cheating. It's like adding extra oil. I'm going to touch a nice shiny surface down here. Okay, I made a print on there. It wasn't the cleanest. I smudged it a bit. Let's go like that. There we go. I made a print. All right, now this is where it gets messy. So you would come along with your fingerprint dust. I see the criminal touched this disc. Let's get that print, because it's not very clear right now. Okay, so you take a little bit of this dust, which is basically like pencil shaving-esque. You're gonna put some of that dust. I don't like using the brush on the print like that. I find I smudge it. You can try it. I like applying dust gently around, and then see how messy this gets? And this does not clean up. So I'll put that there. All right, I'm just going to close this up. That's why I'm wearing gloves. Excellent. I'm going to get rid of that too, because it's going to make a mess. All right. So I've got this disc, and I've dusted on it. I can shake it around, move that dust all over the print, and then if I take this, look at that. A perfectly preserved fingerprint with all of the lines and details. it's just accentuated all of the oil and brought it into focus. So now, I could just take a picture of that nowadays. That's very easy to do. You can scan it using a camera or anything like that. But you can also preserve this print. If I want this print to live forever in an evidence file, all I have to do is capture it. I have to lift the print, and I need to capture the print. And how do you do that? Well, it sounds a little stupid, but you use tape. Yep, you use tape. You lift the print with tape, and you capture it. Let me explain what that means. All right. So, I'm going to take, this is going to be hard with the gloves, apologies in advance. I'll take one piece of tape I've got right here, and I'm going to put it over the print, nice and clean. I'll make sure I get this print captured. There we go. I'm going to press it down on the print. I'm going to lift it off, and look what happens. I've stolen the print onto this tape. However, this is not good with gloves, but I could take another piece of tape and put it on the inside and cover it up. Now, if it wasn't for these gloves, there you go. I've sealed that print in tape forever. I've put tape on one side, I've lifted the print off of the surface with the dust, and I put tape on the other side, and I have captured a fingerprint. And that could go into a folder and be used for years and years and years. Right? It's preserved. So you can see here, I got tape and dust all over me. If I didn't have paper down and I didn't have plastic down, it would be all over my equipment. So I'm going to try and clean this up, and you are going to try and work on this lesson. I've just lifted a print for you. I've lifted it and captured it, and I've shown you how they take prints in a police station kind of environment. And if we get some free time and you're around, we might play around with some of that for fun one day, much like we did with the blood typing. We'll just have a little bit of fun, take a day off and kind of play with it. Nothing too serious, just to enjoy it, because it is kind of a neat process. So until next time, we'll see you in lesson 5, and you should have a great idea who the killer is by then, and you should have a good idea of some things you might want to choose yourself as a final project. So take care.